The rise and role of the independent system integrator in NFV is gaining steam as NFV deployments are requiring very deep experience and network virtualization. On this panel from Mobile World Congress 2017, we look into the role of the independent system integrator and why this is important to industry. Joining us is Amol Phadke. He's Managing Director of Global Network Virtualization and Transformation at Accenture. We also have Kevin Schatzkamer, Vice President of Service Provider Solutions and Strategy at Dell EMC. And gentlemen, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here. Amol, I want to start with you. Of course, NFV provides a lot of benefits, but also provides a lot of complexity. Is the role of the the independent systems integrator to relieve some of that complexity?
Absolutely. So there are three things happening in the industry as you see with NFV coming in. Number one is the ecosystem. So what's happening in the ecosystem is there's a complete disaggregation of the vendor community as we know it. And you see a lot of, let's say, Silicon Valley emerging players that have really come up with very, very clever and innovative solutions. That also presents a challenge for the operators because now they have to manage 30, 40, 50, 60 vendors in their ecosystem, which previously used to be 3 or 4 or 5. So that is the number one element of where there is complexity in the ecosystem. Number two, the business models around this new technology are still evolving in terms of the products and services that are ultimately going to be able to be launched on top of this, and so operators can actually monetize this. That's the second area of complexity. And the third is operators still have a lot of existing infrastructures in place which they need to find a clever, smart way of migrating off. So as an independent systems integrator, Accenture is really trying to simplify the complexity around all three of these elements using our portfolio.
So I agree 100%, right? So at Dell EMC, when we think about the disaggregation that's happening that you mentioned, you know, as an infrastructure provider that embraces that disaggregation, there's also an expectation on us that we do some level of building our own ecosystem, validating and benchmarking software stacks, and even going so far as integrating these components in the lab into reference architectures, and even taking even a step further at productizing some of this in validated systems. The challenge that comes from that is that as much as we vendors would like operators to deploy exactly what we build in our labs and exactly as we test it in our labs, I think there's clear recognition that there needs to be another entity, this independent systems integrator, that can take what we build that I consider to be somewhere between 70 and 80% complete and take that other 20 to 30% customization on behalf of the operator, working closely in connection as a consultant to the operator community.
Exactly right, exactly right.
Amal, you just talked about the importance of reducing the complexity and a sort of a multi-vendor ecosystem. Can you give us an example of what that means?
Yeah, so as Kevin said, you know, that last important point of customization, working with our clients, is really where the ecosystem comes together. So in one of the clients' operating environments that we are working with them and helping them to build, they had to put some security solutions on top of what they already had developed and launched. And this is where technologies like virtual security, virtual firewall, is something that they couldn't really understand what is the best way to implement it in their ecosystem. And so what we did was we helped them assess what the best of breed solutions are, and then of course help them integrate it in their ecosystem so they could actually launch it at a much rapid pace than what they're used to.
Yeah, so on our side, I think that there's a funnel effect that I think that happens in taking individual components and then delivering them into complete systems and solutions at operators. There's a level that we can take on ourselves, right? So we can take on and build hardened platforms that include compute storage networking from Dell EMC, couple it with software partnerships, especially VMware stacks. We can even do some of the interoperability testing for the virtual network functions, and like I said, those reference architecture programs that sit on top of it. But in terms of actually being able to deliver something to the carrier that is backed by the SLAs and able to be maintained and monitored in the way that service providers are used to, because I think in general, especially the telco community, can't live in the world of putting a beta tag on a service and saying this is sufficient to go to market with. There's an expectation that we can monitor KPIs and then enforce SLAs on top of it, and to do that level of integration and feel comfortable that it's ready for a production environment, I think the role that independent systems integrators such as Accenture play is so important.
Amal, would you agree that carriers are still having to answer to declining revenues? And as Kevin sort of mentioned there, are there particular technologies that NFV enables for carriers to monetize NFV? And NFV by itself, as a technology, is not monetizable, or is that incorrect?
No, you're spot on, and that's a great question, by the way. So, a lot of thought is now being put in by the business functions within the operator domain to try and understand whether this is just a technology evolution, or actually is there any business behind it that can help them capture new revenue lines? Because as you know, pretty much all the operators in the world are now facing a crunch in revenues, accelerating costs brought on by a tremendous spike in data and requirements for data. And so technologies, and I'll give you a few examples, SD-WAN or virtual CPE in the enterprise space, but also things like security and the way to monitor technologies in the consumer space from a surveillance, from a monitoring standpoint, as we get into connected home and so on and so forth, would be the way you would monetize the underlying technologies. Because as you said, clearly SDN and NFV are the building blocks of moving to a very different software-driven network, but fundamentally, the products and services that you sell on top of it need to also have that awareness of software-driven technologies, which is where SD-WAN would be an example, where that would be a very direct revenue line that operators can look at to offset the declining revenues they see in traditional voice and data services.
So I would say that it's not just the revenue problem that operators have. I think it's a margin challenge, it's a time to market challenge, and it's an adoption challenge, right? And we tend to get so in love with technology, but when we look at all of these trends, software-defined networking, network function virtualization, the shift towards big data, edge computing, we can keep on going down the list of all of these disruptions that we're seeing, right? None of them are about technology, right? Technology doesn't get deployed for the sake of technology. Technology gets deployed because there's a real operational advantage to it. And if we kind of look across the board, right, and start with NFV, right? NFV is not about virtualizing applications and reducing CapEx because we no longer sit on proprietary hardware. It's about accelerating how quickly we can roll out new services, and more often when services are unsuccessful, how quickly we can unroll them. Right? Mobile edge computing is not about pushing content closer to the edge, because I think in terms of reduction of latency, it doesn't really matter. The air interface creates so much latency already that everything that sits after it is fairly negligible. Edge computing and the rise of edge computing is really driven by the fact that there's an expectation of a new set of services and increasing demand on the infrastructure in which the bi-directional communication between mobile devices moving at high speeds, such as connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, can communicate with an application in real time. Big data is not just about big data because there's more of it. It's about big data because the insights that we can get out of that data from an operational perspective, from a security perspective, and now increasingly from a monetization perspective are all becoming important drivers. Now all of this connects to each other, right? That big data platform, the insights we derive, eventually closes a loop with how I maintain, monitor, and operationalize the infrastructure as well. So all of these trends are very interlinked to each other. They're all driven by clear business cases, right? If we think back 5 years ago when NFV first came, right? The entire story was, does this even work, right? And then we said, does this even scale, right? So yes, it works. Now we know it scales. We've now taken a step back as an industry to think about use cases specifically and how we take those use cases and operationalize them at the right economics.
And Kevin made a great point on the fact that operators need to have agile, perishable services. This is something that's really powered by having a software-driven ecosystem at the back end, because you need to have the ability to deprecate products that are not working within weeks as opposed to months and years. And this is something that requires what Accenture is also doing with its innovation framework, creating a DevOps model for the telcos to really create that revenue funnel that Kevin was talking about.
Can you both go in a little more detail about maybe the services that NFV does enable, but really tying it back to the independent system integrators' role in that? And Amal, I'll start with you on that.
Sure. I mean, I think So what we would typically do in an engagement like this is really work with the operator to try and understand what is the operational and the business transformation that is driven using SDN and NFV and the technology transformation that's happening already. So to give you an example, on the operational transformation standpoint, we will use things like AI and robotics to actually power the operations of the future that can then automate and create that self-service environment that the customers need, the operators' customers need, to take full advantage of SDN and NFV. Because if the operators simply change the technology without really changing the operational domain behind it, the customer is not actually going to see it. And then they're going to always be left wondering whether the telco has actually done anything meaningful from their perspective. And so we help a lot on improving the customer experience using SDN and NFV as a technology. And then the other example would be, we would incorporate almost a business DevOps framework with our client environments, where we get the product, engineering, and operations together in a very agile fashion to really launch the products that Kevin was saying we need to scale at speed.
Are you finding that operationalizing NFV is something that you would need maybe assistance with by an independent system integrator?
Absolutely. I mean, we work with systems integrators such as Accenture very heavily. We work very closely with them from an opportunity to train and have them understand the product and portfolios and the technologies that we're investing in. Right? We work very closely with them in consultation with operators to actually discuss how we take that technology and apply it to a business problem. And then we work very closely as they lead the integration towards a production environment where they're holding hands and supporting that effort as well. But I think to your earlier question, right, there's excitement about the new services that we already know about, right? We already know about things like SD-WAN and IoT, and those services are coming, and NFV just enables those services to actually happen because the economics of those businesses are so drastically different. NFV has to be used because we have to change the economics of how we deliver the service in order to be able to be successful. But more importantly, it's the services that we don't know. Right? It's the innovation that we build on top of this platform, the APIs that we expose that will enable a developer community and an application community to create things that we haven't thought of yet.
Agree.
Be interesting to see what new services NFV enables maybe this time next year, and we'll have you guys on again to talk about that. Also, the operationalizing NFV is something interesting to us and to you as well, obviously, so maybe we can talk about that more down the road a little bit. Kevin, thank you so much for your time, and once again, welcome to the TIA board. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And Amal, it was good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for all of our viewers, for all the content on TIA Now, you can log on to tianow.org. So long.